Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Comic Book University. I'm your host, Professor Bill. Let's get started with Ghost Rider, specifically Johnny Blaze. I think most of you guys have been really waiting, hankering for some Johnny Blaze, right? Because he's technically the original Ghost Rider of the modern age. This Ghost Rider is different from the Phantom Riders that we've been talking about before, even though they were originally called Ghost Rider. Once this Ghost Rider was made out, it was something different, something profound. They didn't quite know what they had. They genuinely had no clue what they had. But they tried. Now, technically the story of Ghost Rider, or Johnny Blaze, goes way back to ancient times. The demon Zarathos, where he would be this big soul-sucking demon with skull face. Basically looks like the Ghost Rider, except much bigger and freakier. And he would go around and he would steal people's souls, and this would piss off other soul-sucking entities like Mephisto. Yeah, take a look at that picture. Guys, these two entities would vie for power and for the souls of the damned, and they often came to blows with each other. Now, just a straight up zap, zap, zap is not really, Mephisto's style. He's more of a manipulator type. So that's what he did. He manipulated Zarathos and tricked him and was able to eventually trap him. And the details we'll get into later, probably in Johnny Blaze Part 2. Yes, guys, Johnny Blaze needs a Part 2. And it'll be after Danny Ketch. So, tricked him and gave him a demonic form of amnesia. So he just basically like human amnesia. He just didn't know who the heck he was anymore. And in order to maintain that he wouldn't remember who he was anymore, he would randomly put the essence of Zarathos into different human hosts, so that he would have to get used to the human and then slowly start to take over the human to eventually start remembering who he was. And once he got to a level where he could, Mephisto would just yoink and put him someplace else with the amnesia thing again, and it's all good. And it was just a way of, it was just a form of control. Demonic control of another demon. I know you weren't scared. The point that I'm trying to make here is that everybody who comes into contact with the Zarathos demon is usually just another pawn in one of Mephisto's grand games. And he plays them better than anybody else. Yeah, we're going to have to do a video on Mephisto one of these days. Oh boy. So we're going to start off with Johnny Blaze. Now, hard as it may be for any newcomers, don't get him confused with Johnny Storm, the Human Torch. It's actually a lot easier than you might think to get them confused, because in the story called Fantastic Four Before the Storms, Johnny Storm actually wound up getting the Zarathos demon before Johnny Blaze did, and it's a, him go that away kind of deal. Really annoying, really confusing. If you like the story, that's great. I could live without it. But Jonathan Blaze himself was a kid who was a part of a cycle daredevil show, right? His father was a famous motorcycle daredevil, and his name was Barton Blaze. And he'd do all sorts of amazing stunts and jumps for the circus and for various different agencies like that. And he was a part of a bigger show called the Crash Simpson Cycle Spectacular, owned by Crash Simpson. Now, Barton didn't have a mom, all right? And I'm not talking about like a weird form of immaculate conception. Rather, his mom, Clara Blaze, she died a long time ago. And, is what it is. Well, Barton wound up dying also in a motorcycle stunt. Horrible thing. If Johnny wasn't already traumatized from the loss of his mother, this really it almost put him over the top. But fortunately, Crash Simpson was a family friend and not just an employer, And he gave him the option: you can go into an orphanage, or you can stay here and you can stay with us, with the Simpson family. And he took the opportunity. He said, yeah, of course, absolutely. He loved Mona as a mother he never had. That was Mona Simpson, Crash's wife. And Roxanne was the sister that he never had, never thought he had. We're going to get into all that good stuff later. So Johnny wound up getting even better. He honed his skills to unbelievable levels. And at one point, he actually was out with Roxanne on his back doing his circus stunt show, and all of a sudden the motorcycle caught fire. He kind of pushed Roxanne off, told her to jump, whatever. There was a little shoving action there. I read the comic. And he was able to bring the bike outside. Now, the thing was about to explode, and everybody's telling him, just jump off the bike and save your life. But he's like, this is my life. If this tent goes up, this is everything that we have. And we're done, regardless of people getting hurt, all that stuff, everything, there's just so much. And no, I'm not going to just jump off this bike. So he brought it outside, crashed into a tree. Fortunate, because he got thrown from the bike. Unfortunately, Mona, not paying any attention to danger herself, comes running up to her foster son and says, "Are you okay?" And the bike explodes right as she's passing it. Yeah, she is critically injured. She's fatally injured, in the sense that it's maybe a day later that she dies in the hospital. Right before she dies, there's the whole swear to me that such and such and such before I die. Of course I'll swear. And that's pretty much what happened. She made Johnny promise that he would never touch a bike again for the rest of his life. It was actually really touching for when this came out. I mean, way back in 1972, really touching. He's like, Mom, you're the mother I never had, and I never got to tell you that. But she was already dead, so she never heard him actually say that word. And just, it actually was kind of heart-wrenching. Don't worry, dumb things happen later on. And there's the balance. So for 15 years or so, he doesn't touch a bike. So moving on, Crash starts to think that his son, his foster son, the son he never had, is a coward. And this is actually really sad. This is one of those stupid things I'm talking about. You have a heart-wrenching moment like before, and now you have this, where we resort back to the old machismo days, right? Where, oh yeah, man, the worst thing that could ever happen is somebody calls you a chicken and they get away with it. You got to prove you're not a chicken because you're a man. For the longest time, Marvel was not writing specifically for kids. They were treating kids as older, as more adult. And this is just one of those things where this was just back to the old schoolyard days, where it's just beyond silly extreme. Just at one point, even Roxanne, who at this point isn't just his sister anymore, foster sister, not even stepsister, foster sister, they actually start becoming romantically involved. And they're keeping it a secret from Crash. He can't know because, freaky, but, whatever. Who am I to judge? So she even calls him a coward. And that's what he can't take. And it's a really silly thing at the end of the day. It's to me, this is just where, worst thing is about to happen, or a just as bad thing, but this was just silly to me. Just, oh, you're a coward. Oh no, I can't have that. So what happens at this point is, all of a sudden, Roxanne gets a phone call and she's excited beyond belief. It turns out that it's her agent, and it's actually the Simpson family agent, and they got a gig at Madison Square Garden. And everybody's excited except for Crash. Crash isn't happy. He's just like, oh, great. Finally, my life work starts to show something and I'm not going to be there to see it. Like, what? He says, I've got the disease. Now, they don't say it's cancer later on. It said it's cancer, but it's just one of those things where they indicate that it is something really bad. But yeah, he is dying. Doctor gave him a month to live max. Well, this is where it gets a little bit more silly. Johnny decides to go into a room and summon Satan. Yeah, that's right. I just found myself actually saying that out loud. Anyway, they didn't have the mythos of Mephisto at the time, not that way. They didn't have the whole mythology put together. It wasn't elaborate at all. So they just said Satan, whatever, you know, is what it is. Either way, it would have been implied this. Here they just directly said it. So Satan shows up and says, what do you want? Johnny says, I want you to save my father from this disease. I want you to save him from basically the cancer. And he says, okay, but then you're going to serve me forever. He's like, all right, done. Consider it done. So he does exactly what he promised. He cures him of the cancer. Now, there'll be other renderings where they show that Mephisto technically tricked him, and that's good. I'm good with that because it goes with Mephisto's character. He is a trickster. He is a liar. You can't believe anything that this demon says. And if he tells you the sky is blue, you walk outside and you double check because darn it, that's going to be the day that it's bright green with plaid polka dots, all right? So Crash decides that he's going to try the biggest stunt ever. It's the biggest show ever, biggest audience, the most money ever, so he's now going to try the biggest stunt ever. He decides he's going to jump over 22 cars, breaking a record. By the way, there's actually really nice cars. They look like Rolls Royces. Like, whoa, man. Anyway, he fails. He fails. There's no trick, no deception, no nothing. He basically tricked himself. He was feeling better. He knew he was going to get the perfect prognosis or whatever. Maybe he didn't. Either way, either he thought, I feel so good, prognosis be damned, or hey, I'm cured, so nothing can touch me. Whatever the case is, he decides on his own that he feels good enough that he's going to try and break this stunt. Maybe just go out in a blaze of glory. And that's pretty much what he does. Except he just goes out. He's dead. He crashes, and boom, he didn't stand a chance. Well, Johnny decides, I'm going to go and do this on my own. And he immediately goes out and says, I'm going to put on the show. And he jumps over the 22 cars. Now, he comes back and, you know, and this is where the whole silly kitty stuff comes up. He's like, oh yeah, now Roxanne, now who's a chicken? Okay, fine, you're not a chicken. But now she's even more angry at you because, dummy, her father just died right in front of her. And now you go and try the same stunt? So, yeah, there's a lot of stupid in it, but maybe I'm just looking at it with hindsight. So, Johnny decides he needs some alone time, and when he goes off alone, all of a sudden he smells that familiar smell of sulfur, and the heat hits, and Satan shows up. Mephisto, it's Mephisto, but here it just says Satan. So, Satan shows up. And he's like, now it's time to collect. Well, Roxanne walks in and says, demon be gone. And he be gones. He be's gone. He jets, man. He boogies. He's out. He's ghost like Patrick Swayze. So it turns out that what she's been doing is, while he's been going behind everybody's back and you know, becoming the best daredevil stuntsman on a motorcycle ever, she's been going behind his back and she's been reading all of his Satan summoning books, and she learned that true love is the thing that repels Satan. So as long as she's alive and as long as she loves Johnny, Satan can't touch him. So clearly we've got to kill Roxanne, right? Well, actually it doesn't happen. I mean, it's a comic book from back in the early 70s. You're going to get what they give you. You know, it's the best they could do. They don't really know the audience that they're talking to yet. They don't even know what they're really going to do with Ghost Rider. It's not until 3 issues or so later, maybe 4, that he actually gets shot and the bullet doesn't do anything. Everything before that is just him trying to escape from bikers and stuff like that. Why is he trying to escape? This is Ghost Rider. Well, back then, they didn't know what to do with him. And just as I've pointed out before in other videos, when the Thing was first made, he wasn't bulletproof. Or maybe he was, but they they didn't let Ben Grimm know that he was bulletproof, and he would try and get out the way of bullets and hold up manhole covers and dodge behind cars to avoid bullets and things like that. And the Hulk, the bullet would actually go in him, but it wouldn't hurt him. And look, even when Superman was created, he was more powerful than a locomotive, faster than a speeding bullet, and able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. All right? He wasn't able to fly, right? There were a lot of things that he just couldn't do. All right? They eventually built his power as time went on. The first character who flew was actually in Marvel Comics, at the time it was called Timely Comics, the Submariner. The Namor with the fish guy with the anklet wings. He was the first character who ever flew. Yeah, you're finding this out in a Johnny Blaze episode. But he was the first, and once they saw him fly, all of a sudden Superman was, oh, I could fly too. So, it is what it is. Nobody really knew how much they could get away with these characters. And let's be realistic. If you had Superman in the very first episode able to lift a building and fly into space and do all the things that he, does today, the kids back then would be like, okay, this is a bit too much to go on, right? So they had to build it up gradually. And that's the early comics, even back when this Johnny Blaze Ghost Rider was first made. It is what it is. So he eventually was bulletproof. Johnny Blaze himself clearly had no powers. None. He was just a regular mortal. But at this point, whenever the nighttime came, his face would melt and the flames would erupt and he would become the Ghost Rider. And he'd have to be the Ghost Rider. They didn't really have any purpose for him. He would just ride around. In the very first 2 pages, they actually had him, of the first issue, mind you, he was riding down the street, saw a biker gang kill an innocent guy in a store that they were robbing, and they saw that he was the only witness, and they went after him, and he just was like, oh, I better get out of here. He wasn't the spirit of vengeance that we know of today. Oh, innocent blood has spilled, I must destroy. They didn't have any of those ideas when he was first created. That's the beauty of going back and be able to see these things for the first time and see how these characters actually evolved to become what they eventually became. Pretty soon, Johnny Blaze was able to turn into the Ghost Rider in the presence of evil. Not when innocent blood was spilled, but just in the presence of evil. So when he did turn into the Ghost Rider, he still had all of the abilities that Johnny had. He had all the memory that Johnny had. He essentially was Johnny for the most part. Very little blacking out or anything like that. He was him all night, and he'd be up all night. And a lot of times he would sleep the whole day. He'd wake up, he'd have a little bit of time as Johnny, and then nighttime, and he's Ghost Rider again. So, yeah, is what it is, right? So he's able to regenerate if he's ever hurt, but he was almost never hurt because if the bullets didn't just go right through and between his bones, they would actually bounce off of his rib cage or his skull. He got shot right between the eyes at one time. They didn't show it, but the bullet just bounced off, and the people were like, oh my God. Right from the very get-go, he was able to summon hellfire and do this kind of a thing and cause hellfire to, form a circle around a bad guy or a group of bad guys and things like that. And they never really had anybody go through it, so it was just the idea that, oh, it's fire and it will burn. Much later, obviously, we refined hellfire, and it's more than just regular fire. In fact, got to the point where it won't even leave any marks on you. It'll simply damage your soul directly. But this is the original Ghost Rider. This is, well, we know that's not the original Ghost Rider. This is the original Johnny Blaze Flame Skull Ghost Rider, who was not renamed into the Phantom Rider sometime later after his creation. So that's pretty much that. I will say that he was originally 5'10", 180 pounds as Johnny. He would turn into a 220-pound, 6'2" beast of a creature when he Ghost Ridered out. He skulled out, flamed out, whatever. And his bike, at the time when he first came out, it wasn't really anything special. It wasn't anything spectacular. It was just his bike. The wheels didn't even catch on fire at first. I mean, you know? Again, they didn't really know what to do with it. It is what it is. He could be outrun by other people on bikes. Yeah, that can't happen with the modern Ghost Riders, right? So he had a couple of different enemies. His main enemy was Satan. Eventually he'd have another enemy called Centurion, and this character would actually go on to become a very important enemy in the future of several different Ghost Riders. And he's basically just a guy with no soul who could absorb souls in a soul gem crystal thing that he had. Not the soul gem like the Infinity Gauntlet, something completely separate. And by this character not having a soul, the Hellfire wouldn't work on him. It was like, psh, whatever, man. Eventually, though, the trick of it is, and this is where it started to get interesting, much, much later on. The series went for 11 years. It started in a bi-monthly series called Marvel Spotlight, number 5. Only went on for 7 issues like that. It's a funny thing, the Ghost Riders, they always seem to do a 7-issue stint and then they're gone. Anyway, he went on to his own solo series, which was monthly, and it went on for 81 issues. So we're talking about a long time, from 1972 to 1983. That's a long time of having Ghost Rider, right? And towards the end, around issue 74, I could be wrong, but around issue 74, Ghost Rider eventually realized, Johnny Blaze realized that he's having such a hard time controlling his powers now, and he's realizing it's because there's actually a real demon inside of him. Mephisto never came to really claim his soul. It was all just a big joke to him. It was all just a lie, a form of control, manipulation. He wanted him to think those things, so he'd have his mind on something else instead. Always have him running, never have him actually staying in any one place, thinking that he could run from Mephisto, and it's never going to happen. There was no way that was ever going to happen. So eventually Zarathos, the demon inside, started gaining more and more control, more dominance, started remembering himself more. And it was harder for Johnny to deal with these things. And eventually he was able to trap Zarathos with Centurion inside that gem. This is why Centurion was such an important character eventually. And they would stay in there, presumably for eternity, battling with each other. And Johnny was able to go off. He married Roxanne. They had 2 beautiful kids, Emma and Craig. And he was able to, he was a member of the Champions for a while. And Angel, Warren Worthington III, was one of those members, and he was a pretty rich guy, and he was willing to give him a very sizable donation so that he was able to buy his own circus, and he did stunt shows and other things there and made his money, made his living that way. So he was able to give his family the life that he always wanted, and should have been happily ever after, but that just wouldn't be comics, would it? Guys, thanks for showing up. We're going to talk about this a lot more. There will be a part 2 of Johnny Blaze after I do part 1 and only of Danny Ketch. So, guys, in the meantime, class dismissed.